Hey readers, writers, and friends, Story Serpent here, and today we are discussing the Fairly True Tales series by Liesl Shurtliff, including Rump, Jack, Red, and Grump. These were published by Yearling, which is an imprint of Random House Children's, which is of course part of Penguin Random House. But before we get into all of that, today's random words are like, share, subscribe, combustible. These that I have here are the trade paperbacks. They were released in 2018, which is when I bought the set and became aware of them because my elementary educating sister put me on to Rump. And when I read it, I thought, this book is amazing, and immediately bought the rest of the series. I am, of course, late to this party because Rump was published back in 2013, and it wasn't until earlier this year, 10 years later, that I became aware of the series at all. So, late to this party, but I'm always excited to recommend good reading when I find it. The series as a whole is kind of a mixed bag. Let's get into each book individually. First, we have Rump. What's Going Well? Liesl Shurtliff overall deals with real-world problems that kids at this age may very well be coping with. And that's one of the things I appreciate about her writing, is that even though these are humorous, fantasy, middle grade adventures, they are also very much grounded in real-world problems that kids are going to face. Rump is dealing with the death of his grandmother, insecurity over his name, very understandable, literally being the butt of every joke in his village. This book is hilarious, so if you've got a boy who is having a hard time getting into books, might be a good place to start. The writing is super solid, and it also teaches young readers how to read for subtext. Books for kids that teach them how to be better readers when they're adults, amazing. Serpent is always going to recommend that. If there's anything that could be better about the book Rump, it is that there are almost no male role models. All of our villains are evil male adults who are either very greedy or just vicious. I don't see any male adults being competent male adults in this book at all. All of the competent adults are women, which is great. Hooray for competent women, but we also need to see more adult male role models, especially in middle grade fiction. But overall, Rump gets a pitch perfect from the Serpent. Next is Jack. What's Going Well in Jack? Apparently, Liesl realized I need more good male role models, and there is a whole village full of them in Jack. The problem is they all got abducted by giants, which leaves the retrieving of the competent men up to Jack. It's an excellent setup, and it leads into the things that Jack is personally struggling with. His desire to be a great individual, not an average individual, and how that can often get him into trouble. It's also a masterclass in perspective taking. One of my favorite parts is where Jack spends several hours in the pocket of an adult giant and realizes this is a terrible experience that I've done to grasshoppers and mice over the years. Probably not going to do that again. The ability to take an experience, process what it might mean for others, and then change your behavior accordingly is a fantastic lesson for any kid to have, especially if it's done with humor and thoughtfulness and it's not at all preachy. What could be going better? Maybe the pacing. Jack is about 30 pages longer than Rump, and I'm not sure it needs all 30 of those extra pages. There are a couple of places where we leave the main scene because I'm not sure why. So the pacing might be a little bit off in this one, but overall, this also gets the Serpent's pitch perfect. And then we come to Red. The writing is still solid in Red, and it's possible that Shurtliff got a memo on her pacing because this book is much shorter. However, I'm pretty sure she could have told this whole story in less than a quarter of the length. Red is a very interesting character that we saw set up in Rump. She is very anti-magic in Rump. She thinks nobody should be using magic to solve their problems. We find out why exactly at the beginning of Red, because Red and her granny are both magic wielders. They're both witches. But Red has seen her magic do damage to people. She has seen it be harmful, and so she's very, very leery of that. That's another one of those real world problems that Liesl is tackling. Sometimes our skills gap can create problems for us, and we have to either engage with that, increase our skills so that we're not falling apart all the time, but it's also about how we respond to failure. This book, however, has some serious issues. While in the beginning there are good reasons for all of the adults to be off, away, not in the picture in terms of the main conflict, when some of those adults come back into the conflict later on, they behave in ways that are just dumb. Red's father is a woodcutter. He has spent his life in the woods. And yet, when he shows up on the scene towards the end of the book, he approaches a wild, wounded animal in close proximity to Red with yelling and screaming and freaking out in a way that I just cannot see a competent woodsman doing. They would know better. They would know that you approach cautiously, slowly, get Red out of there without startling the animal that's near her. In a real world situation, that animal probably should have attacked either Red or her father. So I just don't see that. I think that's one of the least realistic parts of the whole thing. The next issue is the new character we're introduced to, and that's Goldie, as in Goldie and the Three Bears, Goldilocks. And she is daft. This girl is dumb as rocks, is a total chatterbox, even when the situation is dangerous and she needs to shut up to save her own life. It's like she's physically incapable of doing so. She shows up and tries to help Red repeatedly and just proceeds to make more trouble, to make things more difficult for Red. And the lesson that we're supposed to learn, the moral that's preached again and again, is that Red being irritated with this and not wanting Goldie around, that's too harsh. Red needs to soften. Red needs to accept Goldie as her friend, even though Goldie is an incompetent nit who only makes things more difficult. Maybe if they weren't in such dire circumstances and like, okay, let Goldie in on playing a game even though she's not great at it, that might be a decent message. But don't tell kids to keep incompetent people around them. Surround yourself with smart people who are doing things well, who can help you learn new skills. Do not feel obligated to drag idiots around with you. I think that's a terrible lesson. And the biggest crime committed by this book is that the conflict isn't really a conflict. Yes, Granny is sick. Yes, Red is the one who needs to try and make her better, but Granny's recipe for her magic cure-all is carved into the table, and all Red has to do is put a little bit of effort into finding the ingredients. That's it. That's it. But she is so consumed with this notion that I've got to make sure Granny never dies, which isn't realistic and goes way beyond the mark, purely to create more conflict so we have a longer story. So that rather than going and doing what she can in the moment to help her grandma, we get more story. It's one of those things that it's like, I'm going to create this conflict out of nothing for plot. I just don't buy it. It doesn't drive the story forward in a meaningful way, and really, this book could be a quarter of its length if you cut out the contrivances for plot's sake. So while Red is, competently written, not a lot of, awkward sentences or anything like that, I just can't give it more than a mostly meh. Last book in the series is Grump. And I think because I struggled to finish Red, every time Goldie came on the scene, I wanted to put that book down and walk away. And I had to make myself come back and keep at it. I think because of that, as you can see from my little bookmark there, I didn't even finish this one. Not because there was anything wrong with it, not because it wasn't being competently executed on, but because the pacing in the beginning was so slow. It surrounds a character I really don't care about, and so I just can't make myself finish it. So I can't even give Grump a rating because I haven't read it. But based on all of her other books, and based on what I read so far in here, it's clean, it's simple, and if you've got a kid who's finishing out this series, it's probably going to be a decent time for them. But I can't tell you one way or another personally. So as far as the series overall goes, those first 2 books, champion. The next 2, So for overall, I give this series a best beach reads. But definitely check out Rump, definitely check out Jack, especially for your middle grade boy readers who might be having a hard time getting into reading. They're fun, they're funny, and they're well paced. They'll enjoy it. That's all I've got for today. So until we meet again, read on, write on, stay sharp.